The first part is we'll be going over the technical explanation. The first stage of the swallow is the oral preparatory stage. Now, this is the voluntary stage where the food or liquid is introduced into the mouth and prepared for swallowing. The key processes include the first one is the bolus formation, where the food is chewed and mixed with saliva to form a cohesive bolus. The second process is the labial seal. The lips, which are innervated by the facial nerve, close to keep the food from leaking. The third process is the buccal tension. The cheeks, also the facial nerve, keep the bolus centered. The fourth process is the tongue manipulation. The tongue, which is mainly the hypoglossal nerve, positions and shapes the bolus. And the jaw movement, which is the fifth process, is controlled by the trigeminal nerve for mastication or chewing. And longitudinal tongue muscles, which are the superior and inferior longitudinal, shape the tongue for bolus manipulation. This phase ends when the bolus is ready to be transported to the oropharynx, which moves us to the next phase, which is the oral transit phase. This voluntary stage begins when the tongue propels the bolus posteriorly toward the pharynx. The tongue tip presses against the hard palate, and a stripping wave moves from front to back to push the bolus. Then, the posterior tongue elevation creates pressure that drives the bolus into the oropharynx. There are three cranial nerves involved in the oral transit phase. The first is the hypoglossal nerve. This controls the intrinsic and extrinsic tongue muscles for bolus propulsion. The second is the vagus nerve. This coordinates with pharyngeal structures at the transition into the pharyngeal phase. The third is the glossopharyngeal, which provides sensory feedback as the bolus reaches the posterior oral cavity, triggering the swallow reflex. Then there is the transition to the pharyngeal phase or pharyngeal conversion. As the bolus reaches the anterior focal pillars or base of the tongue, it stimulates a reflexive shift into the pharyngeal phase. This marks the pharyngeal conversion, transitioning from a voluntary to an involuntary action. The next phase of the swallow is the pharyngeal phase. Now, this is involuntary as opposed to voluntary, in which the bolus is transmitted to the esophagus. There are three pharyngeal constrictors, the superior, middle, and inferior, all of which push the bolus downward. The longitudinal pharyngeal muscles elevate and shorten the pharynx. The suprahyoid muscles coordinate with the hyolaryngeal excursion, lifting and moving the larynx forward and upward. The cranial nerves involved, the first one is the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the sensory input from the oropharynx and motor to the stylopharyngeus. Then there is the vagus nerve, which is the motor to the pharyngeal constrictors and intrinsic muscles of the larynx. The trigeminal nerve and the hypoglossal both assist with tongue and floor of the mouth movement. There is pharyngeal conversion, which involves switching from the voluntary to involuntary control. The hyolaryngeal excursion involves elevation and anterior movement of the hyoid and larynx, which helps close the airway and open the upper esophageal sphincter. The final phase is the esophageal phase, which is where the food is transported through the upper esophageal sphincter and lower esophageal sphincter to the stomach. The esophageal is striated, which includes the esophageal striated and the smooth muscles. The cranial nerve here is the vagus nerve, which is the innervation for motor control of esophageal muscles and coordination of peristalsis. The bolus enters the esophagus and is moved through the esophageal peristalsis like contractions. The primary peristalsis is triggered by the swallow, and the secondary peristalsis occurs when residue remains to clear the esophagus.
Okay, and I will be doing the adult patient explanation. So I will share my screen really quick if I can. Sorry. Okay, let's see. All right, so these are just a few pictures of the swallowing and things. All right, so the first phase is the oral phase. And this picture right here is basically showing where it starts, which is when you first put food in your mouth. So the oral prep is the stage of getting food ready for swallowing. For instance, when you take a bite of food, you'll begin to chew, and then you'll mix that with the saliva. So once you continue to chew, a soft ball will start to form, which is also called a bolus. Your lips, cheeks, and tongue and jaw is a crucial part of this process. So your lips, you're basically they'll be tight, allowing food to stay in your mouth. And then your cheeks, it keeps the food center while you're chewing. Additionally, your tongue shapes and positions the food while getting ready for the food to be swallowed. And lastly, your jaw moves, which allows the chewing, and the different muscles in the mouth also help guide the food to get ready to transit or transition into the oral transit stage. All right, and the second phase is the oral transit, and then this is basically a picture showing where the food will be located. So once the food is ready, you're down the oral transit stage, and the tongue then moves the food from the front of the mouth to the back of the mouth. Um, Also, while this is happening, your tongue is pressing at the top of your mouth and it's pushing the food downward. You would then feel a sense of a pressure at this moment. Again, your tongue is doing most of the work by moving the food around in the mouth and also help push the food to the back of the throat. Once this food is in the back of your throat, your body immediately gets ready to begin the automatic stage of swallowing. All right, the next phase will be the pharyngeal stage. And in the pharyngeal stage, this swallowing becomes automatic. This stage also happens very quickly. The food then moves to the mouth, into your throat, and then towards the esophagus. The muscles in your throat, particularly the pharyngeal muscle, it contracts and pushes the food down. After it's pushed down, the tongue and muscles in the throat lift to protect your airway and helps the food pass smoothly. The larynx and the hyoid bone also move up and forward to make sure that the airway is closed so the food won't enter where it doesn't belong. This also prevents the aspiration. All right, and then lastly, this is the esophageal phase, and this picture is showing where the food will be located as well. The esophageal stage is the final stage, and this is where the food moves through the esophagus. This stage has muscles that contract, which is called the peristalsis, which is like a wave motion to move the food down. Lastly, the food passes through the upper and lower esophageal sphincters, which are muscles that open and close, and then the food moves into the stomach. All in all, swallowing is a step-by-step process which starts with chewing, forming a bolus, which is the oral prep. And then next is moving the food to the back of the mouth, which is the oral transit. Then swallowing it down your throat, which is the pharyngeal phase. And then lastly is pushed into your stomach, which is the esophageal phase. Your body has different muscles and nerves that work together to coordinate these actions, making sure the food moves smoothly from your mouth to your stomach. And